On the afternoon of 20th of September 1944, the fate of Operation Market Garden narrowed to a single stretch of water in the Netherlands, wide, fast, and unforgiving. The Waal River at Nijmegen curved through low ground and open sky, a major artery of Europe that now stood between Allied forces and the bridge that could open the road to Arnhem. What had begun days earlier as a bold airborne gamble had slowed into a grinding battle, and time was running out. The crossing of the Waal would become one of the most desperate and courageous river assaults of the Second World War. Operation Market Garden was conceived as a rapid thrust into the heart of Germany. Airborne troops would seize a chain of bridges, while ground forces would race north along a single road to relieve them. Nijmegen was critical because it guarded the bridges over the Waal, one of the largest rivers in the Netherlands. Without those bridges, the advance could not continue. The American 82nd Airborne Division had landed near Nijmegen on the 17th of September, tasked with capturing both the road bridge and the railway bridge. They secured the high ground at Groesbeek, but failed to take the main bridge quickly. German defenders reacted with speed and determination, reinforcing the area and turning the bridge into a fortress. By 19th of September, British ground forces of 30 Corps had reached the outskirts of Nijmegen, but the bridge still stood in German hands. Attempts to storm it from the south were beaten back by heavy fire. Every hour lost at Nijmegen meant another hour that British airborne troops at Arnhem were isolated and under growing pressure. The situation became critical. A new plan was formed, audacious and terrifying in its simplicity. American paratroopers would cross the Waal in daylight, under fire, in small canvas assault boats, seize the northern end of the bridges, and hold them until British tanks could break through. The Waal was no narrow stream. It was several hundred yards wide with a strong current flowing west. On the north bank, German troops held prepared positions, with machine guns, mortars, and artillery covering the open water. The south bank offered little concealment. The crossing would be exposed from the moment the boats pushed off. The Americans chosen for the task were mainly from the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, veterans of earlier fighting in Sicily and Italy. They understood the risk immediately. Many of them could not swim. None of them had trained for a river crossing of this scale. The assault boats were not ideal. They were canvas over wooden frames, designed to be light enough to carry, not to withstand sustained fire. Worse still, there were not enough of them. Delays in delivery meant that the crossing would have to be done in waves, with boats returning under fire to ferry more men across. The paddles were short and awkward, and the current threatened to spin the boats sideways. Despite all this, the order was given. There was no alternative. At around mid-afternoon, artillery and smoke began to fall on the north bank. British guns joined American artillery in an effort to suppress the German defenses. Smoke drifted across the river, but the wind was unreliable, opening gaps and revealing the boats as they launched. German guns answered almost immediately, shells bursting along the water and the banks. The river churned with splashes as bullets struck the surface. When the first boats pushed off, the men paddled with everything they had. The current caught them, pulling them downstream, forcing them to fight not just the enemy but the river itself. Machine gun fire raked the water. Boats were hit, some collapsing as their frames shattered. Men were thrown into the river, weighed down by equipment. Some drowned. Others struggled ashore under fire, grabbing at reeds and mud to pull themselves out. Those who reached the north bank found no relief. The ground rose slightly from the river, offering the defenders clear fields of fire. The paratroopers charged forward, firing as they ran, using grenades and sheer momentum to overrun German positions. Small groups fought isolated battles, often without officers, driven by instinct and urgency. The fighting was close and chaotic, with smoke, dust, and the noise of battle blending into confusion. As the first wave fought to secure a foothold, the surviving boats turned back. The return trip was just as dangerous. German gunners quickly realized what was happening and adjusted their fire. Some boats were destroyed mid-river. Others limped back riddled with holes. Still, they came on again, carrying the second wave. The men on the south bank watched as friends and comrades were cut down, knowing they would soon follow. The second and third waves faced the same hell. Courage became contagious. Men who had hesitated now paddled furiously, shouting encouragement, anger, or prayer. Officers stood upright in boats to steer, making themselves obvious targets. Casualties mounted, but the flow of troops to the north bank continued. Slowly, almost impossibly, the Americans expanded their hold. By late afternoon, the northern end of the railway bridge was in American hands. The road bridge, a massive steel span, loomed nearby. German defenders still held parts of it, but their position was becoming untenable. Attacks from the north bank, combined with pressure from British forces advancing from the south, began to close the trap. As darkness approached, the Germans withdrew, or were overwhelmed. At last, the road bridge was captured intact. British tanks of the Guards Armored Division rolled across it that evening, their engines echoing over the river. Nijmegen was finally secured. The crossing of the Waal had succeeded. The cost, however, was severe. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment suffered heavy casualties in a matter of hours. Many of the dead lay in the boats or in the river, carried away by the current. Others lay on the north bank, where the fighting had been fiercest. For those who survived, the memory of the crossing would never fade. Veterans would later describe it as the most frightening experience of their lives. Strategically, the capture of the Nijmegen bridges was a triumph, but it came too late to save Operation Market Garden. The delay meant that British airborne forces at Arnhem could not be relieved in time. They would eventually be forced to withdraw after days of bitter fighting. The grand vision of a rapid advance into Germany collapsed, leaving the front stabilized south of the Rhine. Yet the crossing of the Waal stands apart within the larger failure. It remains a stark example of determination under impossible conditions. The men who crossed did not do so because the plan was perfect or the odds were favorable. They crossed because they were ordered to, because others depended on them, and because retreat was not an option. In that sense, the assault embodied both the courage and the cost of airborne warfare in the Second World War. The landscape around Nijmegen would return to quiet in the years after the war. The river would flow as it always had, indifferent to history. But the memory of that afternoon endures. It is remembered not for clever tactics or sweeping success, but for raw human resolve. Canvas boats against machine guns, paddles against current, daylight against death. The crossing of the Waal was a moment when the outcome of a vast operation rested on individual acts of bravery, multiplied hundreds of times across a single stretch of water. In the end, the Waal River crossing did not change the course of the war on its own. Germany would not fall in 1944, and the conflict would grind on through another brutal winter. But for those who were there, and for those who study the campaign, it remains one of the most extraordinary assaults of the war. It shows how history can pivot on moments of extreme risk, and how ordinary soldiers can be asked to perform extraordinary feats, not in the certainty of victory, but in the narrow hope that sacrifice might still matter.